Ottawa Gay Men's Chorus. He has been an inspiration all the time, and we treasure Jay's participation to our last show. And my memory of Jay is that he was saying, right here. And it's going to be, as long as I'm with the choir, Jay would be there. And he gave a formidable show because he missed one beat, one part, recovered, and came in again, and that was the show of the show. So that's my last memory of Jay. Thank you.
I better go up because I'm kind of short. Whoa! I have to lower this tackle.
She's got it.
Yeah, short people know how mics work. Hi. Probably most of the people in the room don't know me, but my name is Catherine Boucher. I worked for 30 years at a housing organization called Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation, or CCOC. We were the founders of Bruce House back in 1988, I think. And I know Richard and Doug. Richard and Doug were my go-to guys whenever there was a problem for decades. It's not what they call a mic drop. I'll hold on to it. And then we had a series of executive directors. Some of them were called Bruce, oddly enough. And then Jay came, and he just stuck around for so long. That was very unusual and appreciated. So I got to know Jay as a colleague and a comrade in the fight. And we did a lot of fighting for the cause. And I remember that after he'd been there for about a year and a half or 2 years, maybe it was at Pride or fundraiser or something, and he came up to me and he said, I get it now, it's about housing. Like, I get how important housing is. So I thought, okay, we are in this fight together. And much later, in 2009, I was invited to a Housing and AIDS conference in Washington, D.C. But Jay couldn't come because that's the way it was. They didn't allow people who had HIV or AIDS to travel to the States. Even though Obama was president, but I guess they hadn't caught up the stuff yet. Anyway, I went to this conference in Washington, and in the conference there were a certain number of chairs. Every third chair had a white piece of paper on it, and we wrote the names of people who couldn't come. And so I wrote Jay's name on that piece of paper. And I remember that because it was pretty shitty. Anyway, I came back, and then before I retired, I told my partner in crime at CCOC and in life, Debbie, who's sitting over there, that there were a few people that we needed to make sure got housing, and one of them was Jay. And I used to bump into him at the Quickie because he lived in my neighborhood, and he would be at the Quickie, and I'd kind of, put my head in his car, which was really messy. I couldn't believe it. And I'd say, Jay, you got to get on the waiting list. Like, get on the waiting list. He'd go, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. And so in any case, by whatever powers needed to happen, we made it happen so that Jay spent the last few years in a CCOC building. And I think he was appreciative of the light that came through, if I remember. So I'm glad we were able to make that connection with him. So he was a fighter, and I know wherever the hell he is, he's being a shit disturber, which is great. Thank you, Jay. That's it.
So hi everyone. Much like Catherine, I probably don't know many of you in this room, with a few that I know from my Bruce House days. So I met Jay as a summer student at Bruce House about 15 years ago. I got the job of my lifetime, which was to run the AIDS walk as a summer student, I guess 15 years ago. And it was, I can recall it being the best job ever because as a 13-year-old, believe it or not, I was a mini AIDS activist because we had had a family friend who had been diagnosed with HIV early on, and so that had become a very big reality for me and had been involved in Bruce House. And so Bruce House had always been part of my reality. And so all of a sudden, you know, early 20s, I got a job at Bruce House, and like, how much more exciting could this be? And so I land this job and I go into work and no idea what to expect. I had worked a couple jobs in the government, and I don't think I could have landed a better environment, a better dynamic than that summer that I had. I often credit Bruce House for making me the person that I am today. You know, I look at Sue and Richard, and who else is here tonight? Doug is here tonight, but also Craig and Martha, and of course then there was Jay, and Nan and Nancy, I should say too, from those days. And the time that I spent at Bruce House taught me not only how to just accept everyone for who they are, no matter who walks through that door, but it also taught me just what true compassion really looks like. And Jay was a huge part of that. The leadership he brought every single day was like nothing I'd ever seen. So I spent my first summer, and that was great. And then he decided that I should be a contractor, which I knew nothing about, to run the AIDS walk the next year. So I opened a sole proprietorship, and I'm sure I made many tax implications and screwed a lot of things up, so hopefully CRA never comes looking for money. And then I ran the AIDS walk for the second year after that, and it was amazing. Jay, I then went on to do my master's and decided to do some research on HIV and mental health. And so I called Jay. I was studying in the UK, and I called Jay and I said, you know, I've got this wild idea that I want to do some qualitative research. And this is kind of what I'm thinking. And he was like, yep, you're coming back to Canada. This is who you're going to meet with. I'm going to hook you up with the ACO. These are the people you're going to interview, and I'm going to be the first person you're going to interview. And I was like, great. And he's like, when can you be here? And I was like, all right, I'm coming. So Jay lined up, I worked with Colette at the ACO, and he between the two of them, lined up all these qualitative interviews. Jay sat with me for probably 5 hours, went through his entire life story, his journey with HIV, but also his journey with mental health. We spoke lots of stories about Larry, lots of his own life story about how he lived with HIV and his experiences. He held nothing back. He shared very personal details with me because he kept telling me he was just so proud of me and that he just wanted me to succeed, and he was just really excited that I wanted to do this. So I ended up doing really well. I ended up winning an award for my paper. He ended up telling me it was all thanks to him. And so that was great. So Jay has come in and out of my life since then. Every once in a while, you know, he'll post on my Facebook telling me how proud he was of me. Because he was just that kind of person. So I went on to work in government, and always would come back to community and remind people in government how much of a pain in the ass they are when they ask communities for all this information. And because I always have Jay in my head reminding me how annoying our forms are or how much data we ask for. And so I just think that I'm really gonna miss the random pop-ins and the random times that he'll remind me like how good I'm doing, and it always seemed to be when I felt the shittiest. And so he was just that person who knew when to connect with you when you needed it most. And so I'm just so grateful for those experiences, but also just so grateful for him. So thanks.
I will warn you ahead of time, in a few minutes, I'm going to be a big puddle in this room. I had the privilege of having both Richard and Jay as close friends of mine. Actually, I was not the first member of my family to meet Richard. My daughter, Rebecca, who's in the back there, was a theater kid, and got to know Richard through that. And my daughter was a young single mom, and Richard really helped her out a lot. And I'll always be thankful for that. And then a few years later, I joined the Ottawa Gay Men's Choir, and there was Richard, and so we reconnected there. But I don't know how to say this. I'll say this with humility. After the first rehearsal, Richard came up to me and he said, it's very serious, he said, "It's nice to finally have somebody of my caliber in there." I didn't realize at the time what a compliment that was. Richard was a phenomenal musician. We all know him as a man of many talents. Most of us know him through his connection with theater. But could this man sing? And he knew his stuff. I mean, he actually studied it. I just opened my mouth and sang, but he actually studied it and knew it. And I really appreciated his encouragement. I also met Jay at the same time. And Jay and I, we're both 1953 models. And right away, that gave us a bond. And of course, he liked to rub it in that I was 2.5 months older than him. Well, it came time to plan for our 69th birthday. And as gay men, well, I'm sorry, but this is a special year. And Jay and I made plans. I'm not going to share the details. But of course, I celebrated my 69th in May, and he said, we have to wait until I turn 69. Sadly, he didn't make it. So when I party now, in my 69th year, I do so with Jay right beside me.
Hello everybody, my name is Gustavo, as you have heard. I'm gonna share something with about Jay. We met online actually in gay.com back in the years when the internet was in the infancy, okay? And the purpose was to have sex. So we met. but we met online, right? And we actually never did it, just in case you're wondering. But then we became friends, and the reason that we hit in online was because we were the only two persons that we would say that we were HIV positive. Okay, nobody else would say anything about that. It was really the stigma back then. I'm talking about 30 years ago. It was really bad, right? But we hit because of that. We really entered in this kind of brotherhood, okay, which was the HIV community. And then we never did it, I promise, okay? But we have a joke about this. And the last time that I saw him was 2 weeks before he died. He was in the hospital. We just crossed paths because of one crazy reason. And we spent probably 1 hour talking. And remembering these days back then in gay.com. And it was really peaceful to see him. It was a nice meeting. I saw him like he was in the hospital to have his final test and things like that. And he was peaceful actually, and it was, for me, was the best closure that I could have, because after, it was really impacted me, the way that he did it, the way that he died and things like that, right? But it was, for me, the closure that I found that day, 15 days before, it was really good. And I wanted to share this with you, okay? Thank you.
I'm short as well. Hello, my name is Ash. I am Richard's roommate. I was trying to figure out some story to tell that's coherent. But I wanted to share maybe a story of my experience with him when I lived with him. Richard had a lot of roommates, so it was kind of cool to meet everyone who's been his roommate, them sharing their experiences with me, which was really cool. And getting to share that awesome place with him and Allie. I wasn't sure if I could fit in with those two, but I remember one experience where Richard had enough of Allie, and there's a door that kind of separates our rooms from the living room. I had my bedroom, I think, half closed, but open just in case, he needed something. And I remember Allie pushing her head through my door, hissing at me. And I was like, what? She kept hissing at me. She's very good with English. And so when I noticed that he locked her in because he needed a break from her, because she's a very needy cat and she doesn't know what she wants, but she loves Richard so much. So I told her, I'm more scared of Richard than you, so I'm not going to be involved in that situation. But I found those two, I wasn't sure if I would be a good roommate to Richard. I always thought, I'm very bubbly. I'm I sound like a housewife, with too much Xanax or something. But he shared me all his stories, all the stories of his friends, of how much he cared about them, how much he was invested in their lives. The phone calls. I've also met Jay on Tabaret Lawn where we played croquet, and the bickering those two had about the game and all that. And it was awesome to know him, and then suddenly I know a lot of his friends, and you guys shared a lot of stories about him and about yourself, and swearing at him but loving him at the same time. It was like a mix of emotions, but I'm very honored to meet all of his friends and know all of you now. And I think Richard would find this ceremony really cool, and so did Jay. I remember Jay and Richard and I watched Goonies for the last time, because Jay never seen the Goonies. And it was just very fun to hang out with them too. trying to explain the story to Jay because he wasn't sure what was going on. And it was really cool to hang out with those two. I wish I could have known them longer, but it is what it is. So I appreciate and his time with me. So that's my story. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Scott. For those of you who don't know me, you're pleased you don't. I didn't know Jay. He sounds like a much better person than the Richard that I knew. I thought I really had to get up here and clear up a few things. The first time I met Richard, I thought he was a total fucking prick. He was so acerbic and nasty. He was working at the National Art Center at that time, and he was literally Peter Herndorf's guard dog, a job that he did very, very, very well. Our paths continued to circle over a couple of years. We never really crossed each other well, but whenever we actually had a conversation, I kept walking away thinking, fuck, I like this guy. I don't want to like this guy, but fuck, I like this guy. And then we had a chance to work together. I hired him to work with me at the Ottawa Lumiere Festival. And we became good friends through that. I began to see that Richard's crusty exterior masked the heart of a teddy bear, and that beautiful, vibrant side that he would occasionally let out if he was tired of being snarky. And two stories. The first, so at the Lumiere Festival, we wanted to send up these big floating lanterns. And I'd seen them online, and I was like, Richard, this is what we're doing. And Richard, for all of rebellious side, was also very pragmatic about a lot of things, and forced me to actually try and get bylaw to come on side with this, and a bunch of other things. And bylaw wouldn't.
Oh no.
And I'd already bought all of the lanterns, because fuck it, I was doing this. Richard talked me down. He was like, no, you can't do this. You can't actually do this. We'll get in trouble. It can't be done. And there was a part of me that was like, I can't believe that Richard Cliff, the seeming rebel angel, is not allowing me to send all of these goddamn lanterns that I paid so much money for trying for up into the night sky. And later that evening, as most of the crowd had gone, Richard suddenly hauled out the boxes of lanterns, and it was like, nobody's paying any attention, let's light these fuckers up. And I think that is the dichotomy of Richard Cliff in so many ways. And the image I will always have of Richard. My little son was born, and Richard and I were still working together on a different project. And at that point, Richard had actually been my guard dog, which was great for these kinds of shows. Richard was running around with my then year-old son strapped to his chest. And my child was just beaming. He loved Richard. He loved the cigarette smell of Richard. He loved the snaggletooth mouth of Richard. And I made Richard promise that when my child was old enough, that Richard would be that bad gay uncle that would make sure that my child did all of the things that we as parents didn't want him to do. And that Richard would make sure that he did them safely, but still recklessly. And I shall miss that Richard will not be able to do that for my child. I love you, Richard Cliff. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tamara. I've also never had sex with Jay, so you're not the only There's probably very few of us maybe that could say that. I only knew Richard and Jay for maybe the last 5 or 6 years. My memory is terrible. And I didn't know them in a profound way. I didn't know them through their activism or anything like that. I knew them because Richard's kitchen was painted a really good color. And I told my friend who was looking desperately for a roommate that he should go check out this guy because this guy looked like he had good sense. And so my friend did become one of the roommates that Ash has talked about. And I got sucked into the social circle and game night. For those of you who knew, Richard had game night every month. And I can never help but think of these Jay and Richard as always being together. That is how I knew them. They were an incredibly less butch version of the Odd Couple. Because Richard was a rule follower, and Jay really didn't care, right? And watching Jay try to play charades with Richard in the room was a treat every month. But I'm annoyed with both of them for dying and leaving us, for not telling all of us, but yet I can't picture any other way but to remember them together and to have them be together. And so I just want to tell those two bitches goodbye and that I'll see them sometime soon. And maybe then we'll have sex. Who knows?